Welcome, everybody. My name is Jim Ryan. I'm the Director of Research and the Director of the Middle East Program here at FPRI. And it's a distinct pleasure of mine to welcome you all to our webinar today on the Peshmerga reforms in Iraqi Kurdistan, progress, setbacks, and the path forward, with three experts on the region, on the Peshmerga, and who have recently published some really interesting articles on Kurdish politics in Iraq and Iraq and Middle Eastern politics writ large. I am here to chair this event and introduce it to you, and then I'm going to hand things off to FPRI Senior Fellow Mohammed Saleh, who I will introduce in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to thank all of you for joining us here, in addition to folks who may be watching this event via Rudal, the Kurdish media outlet who is simulcasting this in Kurdish. I want to thank the folks there for working with us to get this out to as many people as possible. I'd also like to thank all of our donors, board members, trustees, and supporters of FPRI. This work that we do here is free to you, but not free to us, and we would really, we really are grateful for the support that you're able to provide. And if you're not in that category and would be interested in supporting the work that we do, like the stuff that we have been putting out there, I really would welcome bringing you into the community sooner or later. So without much further ado, I want to introduce one of our newest senior fellows in the Middle East program here at FPRI, Mohammed Saleh. Mohammed Saleh has a PhD in communications from the Annenberg School at the University of Pennsylvania. He is an experienced analyst, journalist, and expert in Middle Eastern affairs, primarily on Kurdistan, in Iraq and Turkey and Iran, and has written a few pieces for us over the last couple of months on really important issues that are facing the region in terms of both its regional politics and in terms of what has been going on in Iraq internally. He's going to be acting as the host and moderator of this event since he helped put it together. And so, Mohammed, I'm going to turn it over to you now to introduce our other two guests and to moderate the discussion going forward. But I just want to thank you for putting this together and for joining us. Mohammed.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, for this very kind introduction. Good afternoon and hello to those who are following us and watching us wherever you are around the world. My name is Mohammed Saleh, as Jim just said, and I'm really excited to welcome you to this webinar on the reform process of the Peshmerga forces in Iraqi Kurdistan. So the Peshmerga are the official armed forces of the Kurdistan region in Iraq. The number of the Peshmerga is estimated to be about 150,000. It is still not a unified professional army, though, as it is mainly a partisan force to this day, and it is controlled primarily by the two major governing political parties in Iraqi Kurdistan, the Kurdistan Democratic Party, the KDP, and the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, or the PUK. There have been multiple reform attempts over the past 3 decades to unify the Peshmerga, with the most recent and I would say the most serious attempt starting in 2017 under the supervision of the United States-led global coalition to defeat ISIS. To discuss this topic, we are very privileged and happy to have with us two very distinguished guests today. Miles Kagin III is a retired U.S. Army colonel. He previously served as the senior spokesperson for the global coalition to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Miles currently holds the position of a senior non-resident fellow at the New Lines Institute for Strategy, and he's also a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. Our other panelist is Dr. Kamran Palani, who is joining us from Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. He's a lecturer in international relations at Salahuddin University in Erbil. He's also a research fellow at the Middle East Research Institute in Erbil and a research associate at Ulster University in Northern Ireland. I highly recommend his fabulous book entitled Kurdistan's De facto Statehood, a New Explanatory Framework, which was published by Routledge in 2022. I would like to mention a number of quick notes before we start the discussion. At the end of this discussion, there will be 15 minutes for questions from our audiences. And you can actually start typing in your questions in the Q&A function on Zoom. The event will last in total about an hour. And since we are also having this event, this webinar being broadcast, live streamed by Rudao Media Network in Kurdish, I would like to say a few words in Kurdish as well. دمویه زۆر سپاسی هەموو بەڕێزانە بکەم کە لە ڕێی سوشال میدیای تۆڕی میدیای ڕووداوە سێریان پانەڵە دەکەن و زۆر سپاسیش بۆ ڕووداو بۆ ئەوەی کە هاوبەشێتیان لەگەڵ ئێمەدا کرد بۆ بڵاوکردنەوەی ئەم وێبینارە ئەم پانەڵە. ئێوەی بینەری بەڕێزی ڕووداو ئەگەر پرسیارێکتان هەبێ ئەتوانن لە ڕێی کۆمنتەکان لە سوشال میدیای ڕوودا وەکو فەیسبوک پرسیارەکانی خۆتان بنووسن و منیش بە پێی دەرفەت و توانە ئەوەندەی کە بکرێت هەوڵەدەم پرسیارەکانتان ئاراستەی میوانەکان بکەم. So with that said, let's now get to the discussion with our guests, Miles and Cameron. Welcome to both of you. Miles, since you are geographically closer to me, let me start with you. You were the spokesperson for the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and the coalition has been very closely involved in the Peshmerga reform process since 2017. Could you please briefly explain to our audiences what this reform process is about and how has it been going so far?
Awadabash and Rojbash to you. Hello to all the friends here in America and also in Kurdistan region and other places who are joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity to share some information about the Peshmerga reforms with the Foreign Policy Research Institute. I'm here today in New York City, but a couple of months ago, I was traveling through Iraqi Kurdistan and had an opportunity to meet with some past and current Peshmerga leaders. And we talked about the topic of Peshmerga reform, and this is an important priority for all of the political and military leaders in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. The Peshmerga reforms have been supported by the United States, but the reforms have also been supported by the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, and more broadly, the global coalition to defeat ISIS have had a presence in Iraq since 2014. These reforms will make the Peshmerga stronger. A unified Peshmerga will be stronger. That's been stated in public statements by the Prime Minister of Iraq, as well as the President of, by the Prime Minister of the Kurdistan region, as well as the President of Kurdistan region, who serves as Commander-in-Chief, and the United States. The United States has been a supporter of the Peshmerga reforms in multiple ways, including providing strategic guidance, and American taxpayers have been funding stipends for the Peshmergas for about $20 million a month. So there has been strong interest from the Pentagon, and you will see annually their visits by senior leaders, including the Secretary of Defense, to Iraq's Kurdistan region, and Peshmerga reforms are at the top of the agenda always. And America sees the Peshmerga as a strong partner against ISIS, but also a strong partner for America's interest in the region and regional security in general. It really was not until this past couple of weeks that we have seen any sort of increase in attacks on U.S. bases, U.S. compounds inside the Kurdish bases in Iraq's Kurdistan region. So that's my opener. I also want to encourage everyone to go to FPRI's website, where you'll see a short article that we've recently published about Peshmerga reforms. And in there, there are some insights into the status of the reforms that are being shared for the first time with FPRI.
Thank you so much, Miles, and thanks for mentioning that your article is actually now live on FPRI's website. Cameron, you have written about the topic of Peshmerga reforms and the domestic politics of Iraqi Kurdistan for years. So I would like to hear from you, what is the importance of this Peshmerga reform project, and what does its success or failure, for that matter, actually means for the governance and domestic politics of Kurdistan, and the Kurdish standing and position within Iraq?
Dr. Muhammad, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm happy to be, to contribute to this discussion. I have an academic background. We academics are interested in providing analytical frameworks, analytical tools to the most of the questions that we will be asking. So I will do the same today with you. I would like to start with this introduction, very broad introduction, that Peshmerga forces are very closely aligned with political powers in Kurdistan, with Peshmerga leaders and units, no matter senior or junior, operating under the authority of the KDP and PUK leadership. So any barrier, any problem in advancing the Peshmerga's reform objectives can be attributed to the lack of political determination among these two political powers. So unfortunately, at the moment, there appears to be a limited will or lack of commitment within the primary leadership of the KDP and PUK to undertake the reforms within Peshmerga. And Dr. Muhammad, the positive reform and momentum witnessed in the past 2-3 years has almost come to an end, and further making the region vulnerable to the security changes in the region. So this is really the framework that I would like to start with. So Peshmerga leaders, Peshmerga forms, when we talk about reform, they are not independent political, they are not independent actors with a lot of agency. They are part of, or they are under the control of the KDP and PUK leadership. You can argue that there are some levels of autonomy within the PUK, Peshmerga, but also they are becoming more and more centralized. So at the moment, unfortunately, there is very limited political support to the reform, which is, Peshmerga reform is not just about reform in a military institution, or it's not just about institutionalizing the military institution. It's about democratization and institutionalization in the whole Kurdistan.
Great. Well, thank you for mentioning that very important point and aspect of this ongoing process, Cameron. Miles, if you could actually maybe delve a little bit deeper, but not, spoil and give away the whole sort of content of your article. Can you talk about how much of this reform project has actually been accomplished, met so far? And what are the major benchmarks or aspects of this reform process that are still waiting to be met and implemented?
When the Peshmerga reforms were first announced as an initiative of the Kurdistan region government with the support of US, UK, Netherlands, and Germany, there was a checklist of about 35 different action items. That list has morphed over time, and now the action items I would categorize in 4 main categories, and there's a 4-year implementation plan. So there's no expectation that overnight there would be the achievement of all these reforms, but that these reforms will be implemented progressively, but also assessed quarterly and in an annual way between the United States and the Ministry of Peshmerga. Some of the key highlights, there will be the integration of partisan units that Kamran has mentioned, and that integration would put all of the Peshmerga forces under the Ministry of Peshmerga. For the American audience, the Department of Defense, as you're aware, controls all military forces in America. We do not have a Republican Army and a Republican Navy and a Democrat Air Force and a Democrat Marine Corps. Everybody is unified under the U.S. Department of Defense. This is a similar type of concept to bring in those political Peshmerga forces under the Ministry of Peshmerga. Also, we want to have biometric enrollment of soldiers. What's biometric enrollment? This is where you have every soldier identified with things like thumbprints and retina scans, and having their ID and documents put into a master database. What does that do? One, it allows you to track soldiers. There have been problems in years past with ghost soldiers. So there could be units receiving payments for soldiers whose names were on a spreadsheet, but those Peshmerga did not actually exist. So this is a way to have an understanding of the troop levels and to have also more security, because we did not want any bad actors infiltrating the ranks. This also helps for next big important part of the Peshmerga reforms, and that's the transfer of electronic funds. There's so much banking in Iraq and Iraqi Kurdistan is not as mature as Western nations. And so there are two things that are required for banking. One is the infrastructure. There are ATMs available, there are banks available, but also a behavioral change. So mandating that the Peshmerga receive electronic funds transfers for their payments eliminates corruption. It creates a behavioral change where the Peshmerga will move more toward using banks and trusting banks and transacting money more efficiently. It's really a burden for people to have to be paid in cash payments or by bills. And the last thing is compliance with requirements that the U.S. has for stipends. The U.S. wants to ensure that the leaders of units are in compliance with human rights, and that the units are operating within the framework of the Ministry of Peshmerga and international law.
Thank you so much, Miles, for laying out the specific contours of this reform process. Cameron, as I also said in my intro, and as you and many of our audiences probably know very well, this reform process is not actually something new, right? I mean, this has been talked about basically for the past 3 decades in different ways and with different degrees of seriousness. Why are we still in 2023, as I said, almost 30 decades away from when this kind of talk started in Kurdistan? Why are we still talking about Peshmerga reforms? Why the political will has not really been there to conduct these reforms earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question. To be honest, I believe that Peshmerga reform is very much dependent on the balance of power between the KDP and PUK. So whenever there is one side is dissatisfied with the balance of power, it significantly impacts the process of Peshmerga. So you may, whenever there's a balance of power, or whenever there is satisfaction with the balance of power between the two, you would see a lot of progress in the Ministry of Peshmerga, a lot of progress within the Peshmerga forces. So just let me clarify one thing. You have unification of Peshmerga, which referring to unifying the KDP and PUK forces, and then you have got the institutionalization of Peshmerga. So these are the two different. For me, like the unification is very much symbolic, is very much important. It's about like creating national army, more unified force, unified identity. The other is more technical, is related to the reforms my colleague here mentioned. So whenever I do interview Peshmerga military leaders, I can feel that they are more institutionalized than 2 years ago, than 5 years ago. But the unification element of it is very much dependent on the political dynamics. And then my whole argument is that And at the moment, there is no satisfaction with the balance of power between the leaders of the two parties. So as long as there is not such satisfaction with the balance of power, so Peshmerga unification will be limited and conditional. That's why we are talking about it, and we will be talking about it in the next 2-3 years.
That's a great point, and we'll delve deeper into this in the discussion. Miles, like what would the Kurdistan region and the Peshmerga actually gain from the success of these reforms? You have been involved with the Peshmerga. You have worked with the Peshmerga, the coalition's spokesperson based in Iraq and Syria. And so can you talk about what the Peshmerga and what the Kurdistan region as an entity, non-state entity in a very tumultuous region and country would actually gain from the success of this reform process?
Let's take a look back at the history, and this is a very broad brush, but Kurdish people, as we're in this is 100-year anniversary of the Lausanne Treaty, Kurdish people have been under pressure from nation states and different ethnic groups, including Turks and Arabs and others, for hundreds of years. And in the past century, there have been Peshmerga groups in Iraq, Iran, and associated groups in Turkey and Syria, and a lot of movement in between the past 50 years of those people and leaders that have been a point of strength and also a point of pride for the whole entire Kurdish community. There's not a time I'm ever in Kurdistan region where somebody does not have a story about their father who was a Peshmerga who stood up against Saddam Hussein's forces or stood up against Iranian regime. And these stories are important for the unity and the cohesiveness and the identity of Kurdish people. And so a unified Peshmerga will provide a few things. One, it will provide strength in military strength in numbers against pressure. On the southern border of Iraq's Kurdistan region, and what are the so-called Article 140 areas, the disputed territories, we have the Hashid al-Shabi, who are bumping up against this region. And in the past week or so, there was a conflict where some Peshmerga were killed in the Makhmur area by some of the Iraqi security forces. There's been encroachments from Iranian forces, primarily through militia groups, but also there are some Turkish activities, some welcomed, some maybe more clandestine that is happening, but these things are happening because there's not the strongest Peshmerga who can secure the entire region. There's also efficiencies. It frankly costs more money if you have multiple military headquarters and multiple chains of command and multiple groups to purchase food and supplies and ammunition and equipment for. It costs more money because you're not buying in bulk and there are not efficiencies. So many of the Peshmerga reforms are related to institutional efficiencies, doing things better, and that creates more strength. And the last is not directly tied to the process of Peshmerga reforms, but an outcome. The world is watching. The world looks at Kurdistan region with intrigue and interest and opportunity. And having a secure Kurdistan region that is secure both visibly, but also through its reputation, will encourage more foreign investment and more stability for the region, and that will help all the people of Kurdistan. So the Peshmerga are central to the economy, identity, history, and future of Kurdistan region.
Thank you, Miles. Cameron, can you sort of speak about the other side of this situation? So Miles talked about the success. What would the success bring? But can you probably talk about failure? What if this reform process actually, ends up in failure, does not achieve the objective and the goals set for it? Like, what kind of consequences would this have for Kurdistan's relationship with the West and the United States in particular?
Yeah. Because of, as Miles said, about the history of Peshmerga and what it means, the concept of Peshmerga. Because for us, for the Kurds, Peshmerga is not a security member, it's not a military member, it's a concept. It's about history, it's about identity. And because of this, the sacredness part of Peshmerga, still like in our political vocabulary, we don't want to say KDP Peshmerga, PUK Peshmerga. We really don't want to use it because of the importance of Peshmerga in our imagination, in our identity, in our history. Unfortunately, I'm not like generally pessimistic, but I do believe that all of the conditions that we need to reform Peshmerga, to institutionalize Peshmerga, and all of the opportunities we need to have, we have had it in the past. So for me, it's not the question of whether we have the more institutional support, more institutional capacity. It's related to the whole political system. And I don't think the KDP and PUK leadership are ready to radically to change the status of Peshmerga, because if they do it, their entire political and power structure will change. So back in coming back to your question about what will happen if you fail, I think so everyone, whenever there is a tension between KDP and PUK, there is a political tension. So people think of military confrontation. So this is where I think it's unlikely to happen at the moment, because there is still very strong support to Kurdistan. There is still dialogue. There is still a government. So, but these are the scenarios. Whenever we think about the failure, we think about the two administration having different checkpoints and crossing to the other. It's like crossing to the border of other country. I'm not saying that we are close to this condition, but this is, I think this is what we mean by failure if it happens in the future.
Miles, speaking to that notion or idea of the failure of the process, recently the former commander of the coalition in Iraq and Syria, Major General Matthew McFarlane, actually came out with a sort of surprising and unexpected critical statement of the pace and the achievements of this reform process. And a lot of people in Kurdistan interpreted this, as a sign of frustration and disappointment among the global coalition vis-a-vis the reforms. There's, however, something that is, like sort of confusing and unclear in terms of how this process is being conceptualized, or at least how the public messaging surrounding, this reform process is being communicated to the broader public. As you said, there are a number of points, a checklist with a specific 35 number of benchmarks and steps, procedure that need to be met down the road. Why doesn't the coalition actually, or don't you think it would be more effective for the coalition to come out publicly and assign blame and say, for example, which one of these two major actors, the KDP and the PUK, is at fault for which part of this process? Because otherwise, the general messaging and the voicing of frustration and disappointment doesn't really do much in the public, right? It allows for each one of these two actors to actually hide behind the general messaging and not take responsibility for for any fault of their own in the process. What do you think about that?
Well, the previous U.S. commander of the coalition in General McFarland, who you mentioned, he made his statements, I think, a day or two before he left out of his position. And the reason why he made those statements criticizing the pace of the reforms at the time was because he did not want to hand off a adversarial relationship to his successor. So it's better for him to send a hard message going out. Then the new commander comes in and can have a good working relationship with the Peshmerga leaders. But he was also delivering a message that was approved by Washington, D.C. And in Washington, there's close scrutiny on the pace of the Peshmerga reforms. And one of the levers or the things Washington is doing in accordance to the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed in 2022 is reducing the amount paid in stipends to the Ministry of Peshmerga every year. And then by 2026, if things go at the current pace, the Ministry of Peshmerga should be able to fund itself. The ministry has done some things to implement the reforms. One of them is having written a budget, a multi-year budget for submission for approval. Of course, right now we know budgets are not getting approved. There are a lot of budgetary issues, not only between Erbil and Baghdad, but also with the status of the parliament in Kurdistan region. But the Ministry of Peshmerga has done its part. But there are key reforms that America would expect to see, and I think many people in Kurdistan region, and certainly those who joined us today, and namely that there is a strategic plan to integrate the partisan units, the Ministry of Peshmerga forces with the 70s Peshmerga and the 80s Peshmerga. And right now, that core aspect of the reforms is still not done. So that will take political leadership, and there's been both political parties at various points have been slow to turn in documents or not sharing information or disputes about what percentage of officers should staff headquarters from different Peshmerga groups. So there's really maybe no advantage of pointing fingers at any particular side, as this is a significant effort for all political leaders to bring the Peshmerga under the umbrella of the Kurdistan region government.
Well, thank you for that clarification, Miles.
Dr. Mohammed, may I
go ahead? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Miles mentioned the threat or the presence of Shabi militias. I think you asked about the failure. I think for me, like someone originally from disputed territories, and whenever I travel to the areas, I see more military consolidation of Shabi militias, and most specifically Iranian proxies or pro-Iranian, whatever you call them, all the way from Sinjar to Jalola. So they are really militarizing the communities, militarizing the ethno-religious communities there. And the failure is how to respond to these security threats. It's not your border, it's your territory, it's your people and population. In the current form of Peshmerga being divided internally and politically divided, I don't think the whole region is ready to address the current and the potential future security threats coming from these actors in the region.
Thank you, Cameron. Let me also, go back to this whole conceptualization of the reform process that Miles also touched upon right now. So in the past, we have had this so-called 50-50 division of power, right, in Iraqi Kurdistan. That is like an equal division of all centers and institutions and levers of power between the KDP and the PUK. And it seems to me, and if I'm wrong, I would like to be actually corrected on this, but it seems to me that the notion of the Peshmerga reform this time is also the idea of reviving that 50-50 sort of division of power within the Ministry of Peshmerga ranks and at different levels of the ministry. This process was tried in the 90s. It ended up in failure when the Kurdish civil war happened, and each Peshmerga unit basically went with the party that they were affiliated with. It happened, it was tried again after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and ended up in failure again in the aftermath of the Kurdish independence referendum in 2017. If the current reform process is following a similar template in terms of a equal and 50-50 division of the Ministry of Peshmerga between the two major parties, what guarantees are there that it is going to succeed this time, and that this reform process, even if it was implemented and succeeded technically, would actually hold in the future, especially given the periodical tension that keep emerging between the KDP and the PUK? Kamran, you can go first, and Miles, if you also want, you can chime in on this question.
Yeah. Over the past few years, the KDP and PUK leaders have been talking about a new strategic agreement between the two powers, reflecting the balance of power. I don't think we are close to any strategic agreement, because to have a stable long-term strategic agreement, you have to have a stable political condition in place. I think we don't have this condition anymore because of the lack of cohesion within the PUK over the past 10 years, over the past decade. It has become also very difficult, adding further difficulty to creating a political condition needed to the Peshmerga unification or the Peshmerga institutionalization. So I don't think really Kurdistan is going to have a stable political consensus among the two powers anytime soon, because you have got one party, which is PUK, has just recently had a new leadership congress. It is internally divided. It needs a lot of time, a lot of effort to build itself internally, even if they manage to do it. So, and then you have one party, KDP, still very cohesive, consolidated, doing well in the elections. So for me, I wish the concept of Peshmerga reform was technical, so we could really wait for many years to address the technical aspects of Peshmerga. For me, it's related. It's the defining feature of the power structure, which really needs a clear satisfaction of power distribution, which is not really ideal for democracy, by the way, for state building. It's not great, for me to advise you need to have another balance of power agreement so we can have progress in Peshmerga reform. But that is the system. We are talking about the system is very much based on political consensus between the two powers.
Miles, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that? As I said, and correct me again if I'm wrong, if the coalition is going with with the notion of restructuring the Ministry of Peshmerga in the Kurdistan region based on an equal 50% division of power for each political party, what is the thinking behind this, and what are actually the guarantee that this would not fail again, given that, as I just mentioned before, this process did not really end up in success. The process being conceptualized around an equal division of military power and security power between the two parties.
Well, part of the reform is to try to have institutional changes that would lead to longer-term success. So if you're bringing everybody into the same payment system, if they're all in the same logistics system, then part of its concept is it would be more difficult to separate them. If the Peshmerga individuals are assigned at different regional guard brigades in different areas, different physical areas of Kurdistan region, then they will develop relationships with their fellow soldiers and operate and have a mentality that is more unified. I'm a retired American soldier, and there soldiers from America from 50 states, and we also have naturalized citizens but when we're wearing the uniform of the U.S. Army, we see ourselves as supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States. There's not allegiance to political parties. So the concept of us fighting each other is something that would be far away historically, or represent some other nation that's not as strong a democracy. But there are some signs and some activities within the reforms that I quickly want to explain before we go to the Q&A from the audience. The division of the security zones, there are these sectors 1 through 8, and that's previously how the Peshmerga forces divided up the territory that they would defend, more or less. Now, through the reform process, there's establishment of division level headquarters. So this is a headquarters commanded by generals, where there are subordinate brigades underneath. And the concept is that through centralized operations, the senior generals, under the guidance of the commander-in-chief, could move forces around based on security threats or other operational requirements. This is also taking time to implement, but there has been some progress with the establishment of 2 division headquarters, and more than 20 of these regional guard brigades have been brought under the Ministry of Peshmerga. So they are not partisan, so to speak, and they're aligning to the policies of the Ministry of Peshmerga and taking the orders from generals who are leading divisions. So I'll pause there, and I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of this in the Q&A.
Thank you for mentioning that. That was a really important technical aspect and point to mention, Miles. So let me go, because we are almost nearing the last 15 minutes. Before we actually go to the Q&A, I have one question that I think a lot of our audiences might have on their mind as well. So the relationship between the Kurdistan region, whether the Peshmerga or the political leadership of the 2 main parties, the KDP and PUK, with the United States and Western European countries was quite a strong. Up until 2017, there was a great deal of trust, and I would say a great deal of respect for the Western role in Iraqi Kurdistan. A lot of people realize, that the survival and continuation of the KRG as a non-state actor was really dependent on Western support. But the Kurdish independence referendum in 2017 and the aftermath of that, and the way that the U.S. and other Western countries reacted to the referendum and reacted to the military operations by the Iraqi army, Iraqi Hashd al-Shabi groups, and the Iranian IRGC. The way that the West reacted to that led to really a breakdown of that trust that had been there up until that point between the Kurds and the U.S. and Western countries in general. So I was curious to what extent this actually, factors into the thinking and the calculus of the KDP and PUK in terms of wanting to comply with this Western-initiated, reform project in Kurdistan. Do you think that particular moment in 2017 had an impact, or has an impact, in terms of how good or not good this particular process is now moving? Miles, you can go first, and then Kamran.
The reform decision in 2017 obviously did not work well for Kurdistan region. The areas around Kirkuk were lost to these Iraqi security forces and Hashd al-Shabi. And this was maybe against some of the advice from Washington and some of the other nations' capitals. But it's clear that the Western nations are committed to Iraq's Kurdistan region. Germany has just extended its mandate for forces to provide training and advising. The United States, of course, through the Memorandum of Understanding process, is a multi-year partnership and commitment to the region. And I had the benefit of visiting some of the training areas for Peshmerga in Atrush and Beneslawa, and I saw soldiers from Finland in Italy, working closely side by side with the Peshmerga to provide their best training techniques for the individual soldiers and also for small units. So I think this commitment will continue in spite of what may have happened in 2017.
Cameron?
I think
maybe, sorry for interrupting you, Cameron. If you could also touch, on the fact that how this, at least relative breakdown of trust is affecting, the Kurdish leadership's calculus and maybe pushing the parties toward closer alliances with the regional countries, versus the US and the Western powers.
Yeah, Dr. Mohammed, I'm trying to make some big, maybe controversial, maybe personal, subjective statements here. Over the past 2-3 years, I have had the opportunity to listen to American diplomats trying to explain the Biden administration's Iraq policy and Kurdistan policy, and one of the key elements of this policy is to engage Kurdistan and engage the Iraqi partners, but remain less visible. So there have been a lot of key moments happened starting from like rockets attacking the Kurdistan the Erbil airport, inside Erbil, the US facilities, the gas and oil facilities of Kurdistan. In all of these moments, US has been less visible. I think this has created confusion among the local stakeholders. And during this time, I've also had the opportunity to listen to other regional and global actors, people coming from China, people coming from Iran, telling them that, hey, I mean, US is no longer interested in the Middle East, is no longer interested in Kurdistan. You have to understand it. It's a matter of time. And then Americans trying to say, no, it's not disengagement. It's restructuring of our vision for the Middle East. But one word, if I use one word to describe the current status of Kurdistan-US relations, is confusion. And there is confusion both among the people, ordinary people, and then the elites level. Still, there are elements of continuity, but I'm not sure the implications of this confusion for the long-term Kurdistan sustainability in the region. Because I again mentioned the security threats coming from disputed territories are significant, can be existential. And the financial political pressures coming from Baghdad are again existential. Iranian, Turkish, increasing military activities and military pressures on the border, but also inside Kurdistan, can also pose existential security and political threats. This is the moment, I think, visibility of US is as important as it is technical and support on the ground.
Thank you, Cameron. I think that's really an important point for a lot of people, policymakers, in particular in Kurdistan, in Washington, and other Western countries to think about how to make this, how to restore trust, and how to make this mutual relationship beneficial to both sides and also viable in the long run. So with that, let's go to the question that we have from audiences. There is a question from David Romano. He's saying that, are there examples from other countries we could learn from when trying to unify the Peshmerga forces? It seems an impossible task given how both the KDP and PUK do not trust each other and how both rely on patronage networks, including Peshmerga jobs, to maintain political support. But have other countries done a similar process of unification, and if yes, how? I assume he's basically asking about insights that could be applied from other contexts to the Peshmerga reforms. Miles, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll give a little example. I served in Iraq 3 different times. The first time I was there 2003 to 2004, and then I was there later in 2009, 2010 in the south of Iraq. The south of Iraq is almost fully Shia area, and I was working there with the Iraqi army, police, provincial police, and also border guards. And you had instances where there may be a Sunni commander in this largely Shia area, and the Sunni commander was effective and well received and able to exercise their military leadership. The difference was these were religious differences between Sunni and Shia, but everybody, the Sunni or Shia, identified with being part of the central federal Iraqi army or police or border guards, as it may have been. The case of the Peshmerga, you have everybody is speaking, well, I guess Sorani, some are speaking Madini, and maybe a few Kermanjis, but mostly the same cultural identity, mostly are the same religion, and to an outsider would look very much the same between Soleimani and Dahuk. But because of the political leadership, that is why they're divided. I don't have any additional expertise or knowledge of other nations and where they have had to unify political forces, but I suspect there have been plenty of examples as boundaries and leaders have changed over time.
Cameron, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, you know, if I answer to Professor David Romano, I would say I don't think I have any example, but there is any model in the region to the best of my knowledge. But I know that Kurdistan is a model for how non-unification still works. So it's a very weird model. You have a unified units within Peshmerga, but then within Ministry of Peshmerga are not unified. It's still safe, it's still stable, it's still secure. I don't know how to conceptualize it. And the question I would never want to raise it is that if at one day we reach to the point that unification, institutionalization of creating one army, one force is not possible, can we ask the question, how can we make the existing non-unification work? So making them two separate institutionalization process, two separate accountability measures within each of these forces. I would never want to ask this question, but this is more hypothetical about how we deal with the situation in the future.
Thanks to both of you. So we have another question from Vladimir. He says, this is for you specifically, Cameron. You mentioned the checkpoint issue. Do you think also the Asayish or the local security forces in Iraqi Kurdistan should be included in the reform process, since checkpoints divide the KDP and PUK zones of power in the region?
You know, you ask it for what do we mean by the concept, what the concept of Peshmerga means to us. I think in general, we don't include security and intelligence in the discussions about security unification in Kurdistan. We only target Peshmerga and Peshmerga forces. That is, the whole process is also about, but also our understanding. We don't talk about security forces responding to different political parties. To be honest, this is a very strange system. You also don't feel it, to be honest. For most of the people, you don't feel that this is a KDP security, this is PUK security. You feel this KRG security while it's not KRG security. I don't know how to conceptualize the feeling experiences of people. I think the security unification, intelligence unification is as much difficult, if not more difficult, than Peshmerga unification, because you are dealing with 200, 300,000 people, and the employment of all of these people also have a lot of implications for different networks, patronage networks in Kurdistan. So I think it's much more difficult process. But the unification of Peshmerga, I would say, if we manage to succeed, it will be symbolic, it will be integral to all of the other unification aspects in all of the other sectors beyond security. We have not even talked about the lack of economic unification, economy unification, border unification. So these are other aspects, but I think Peshmerga reform will be very symbolic, but also integral to all of the other aspects. And unfortunately, in security, there is very limited coordination between the security forces of Erbil and Suleimania. and many terrorist attacks of the past 20 years. I'm not saying it was mainly related to this, but the lack of coordination between security forces from Sulaymaniyah and Erbil contributed to many terrorist activities in Kurdistan.
Sure. Let me jump into this last final question in terms of the role of the Kurdish civil society. What the public actually what kind of role is the public in Kurdistan actually being given in terms of input into this Peshmerga and broader governance reform process in Kurdistan? Miles, you were involved with the on the coalition side with the Peshmerga. Like, is it something that is really sort of thought of as important or a priority in terms of trying to?
Is the Peshmerga reforms a
Yes,
priority?
Yes, sorry, for one moment I lost the Zoom screen. So does the coalition actually attach importance to what the broader Kurdish public thinks about the reform process of the Peshmerga, or the KRG in general? Or is it something that is sort of the interlocutors are solely the KDP and the PUK and the coalition in this case?
Well, when the coalition military leaders and Pentagon officials travel to Erbil, these visits are public. They take the pictures either at the Ministry of Peshmerga or at Ban Pirman at the Prime Minister's place or the President's headquarters. And there are press releases from time to time about the equipment that is being divested to Peshmerga forces. So it is important. But also, the United States does support partisan forces. The United States, through special operations, supports partisan commandos and special operations forces. And those forces have been extremely effective in operations against ISIS, both inside of Iraq as well as some missions into Syria. And special operations has been has had unique relationships with the various types of commandos throughout Kurdistan region.
Thank you. Kamara, maybe if you could comment on this very briefly, maybe for a minute. What is the role of the Kurdish civil society here?
To be honest, and unfortunately, for many civil society actors now, they have more immediate financial priorities than security issues. But I've been for long advocating for more civil society engagement for two main reasons. First, the public needs to know really what is going on. Whether if the international partners are not satisfied with the process, this needs to be, in my view, public, so local civil society actors can put pressure, can mobilize an internal civil society power, so to put pressure on the government and the political parties. There has been very limited engagement in public messaging of the coalition, how their perceptions, how they see the process with the local civil society. And second, still, like with all of the problems, still there is a very good reception of Western partners working in Kurdistan, both among the civil society at the people level as well as the political actors. I think these are the opportunities for me. This is to create more public awareness on the ground. The engagement between the international partners and the Peshmerga, I do see there has been conferences, workshops, meetings, etc., but not very effective. The coordination, I haven't seen it honestly on the ground.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Cameron and Miles, for this really rigorous and insightful discussion. I realize that This is a very multifaceted and rich topic that we could spend hours discussing, but this was great. Thank you so much. I would like also to thank my colleagues at FPRI for making this event happen and for their support. The video of this webinar would be available on FPRI's website and YouTube channel, and also on Rudao Media Network's social media platforms, including Facebook and YouTube. And I also strongly encourage our audiences to read Miles' article on the Peshmerga reforms on FPRI's website. So thank you very much to everyone, to our audiences, to our panelists, and I wish everyone a great rest of the day or evening wherever you are.